When men go bad, they often go bad by being antisocial and tyrannical. So, where there's way more antisocial men than there are antisocial women, which is why there's 20 times as many men in jail as there are women. So each gender, let's say each sex, has its own characteristic pathologies. And there are some antisocial women, and there are some high neuroticism guys or some guys who are really agreeable as well. So, but they're rarer. You might say, well, if you're only going to interact with someone once, you might as well just take advantage of them and run off. That's what a psychopath does, by the way. And there is room in the environmental niche for psychopaths, but they have to keep moving around, because otherwise people figure out who they are. So they just move around, and they can take advantage of one person, maybe 5 times or 10 times or something, and then the reputation spreads and they got to get the hell out of there. So it's not a good long-term strategy. If you're preyed upon by a psychopath, which you will be to some degree at some point in your life, the psychopath, who will be narcissistic, will presume that you're stupid and that you deserve to be taken advantage of because you're naive and stupid. So it's actually a good thing that he's doing it. And his proof for, and I'm saying he because there are more male psychopaths, the proof that you're stupid, naive, is that he can take advantage of you. And so, like, if you were wiser, you'd be, you'd know his tricks, and then it wouldn't be morally necessary for him to show you just exactly who knows what about what. And so the psychopath will use his ability to fool you as proof of his own grandiose omnipotence, omniscience, and narcissism. And the problem with that is that you can be fooled by a psychopath, and virtually anybody can. So that Robert Hare, for example, who studied psychopaths for a long time and interviewed a lot of them, like hundreds of them, and videotaped many of the interviews, he said when he was talking to the psychopath, he always believed what they were saying. And then he'd watch the video afterwards and see where the conversation went off the rails. But, the proclivity to be polite in a conversation is very strong. And if you're polite, you don't object to the way that the person unfolds their strategy, And psychopaths are pretty good at figuring out how to manipulate, obviously, how to manipulate people. And the probability that you will be immune to that is extraordinarily low. Go watch Paul Bernardo being interviewed by policemen on YouTube. That's that's enlightening, man. Paul Bernardo, he's like the CEO of a meeting in that video, He gives the cops hell, he gives the lawyers hell, he protests his innocence. He basically tells them that they're rude and untrustworthy because they don't trust him because he did a few little things 17 years ago. But he basically goes, well, that's a long time ago. It's like, we're past that, aren't we? I mean, I'm having a discussion with you. I'm trying to help you solve some crimes, which, by the way, I committed, but we won't bring that up. And you're accusing me of being a liar. Like, you're not playing fair. What's up with you? And then when they answer, he looks at his fingernails, which is like, that's a lovely little manipulative thing, because it basically means whatever happens to be under my fingernail at the moment is much higher priority than listening to your foolish story. And you watch, you'll see people do that to you. And then you get a little insight into what they're up to. He's very good at that. And so, or he looks outside, or he just looks at his hands, or he looks out the window, immediately dismissive in his nonverbal behavior. It's brilliant. The courts were forced to release that, by the way. But look it up, Paul Bernardo on YouTube. Wow, it's just mind-boggling. He's so good at what he does. And he's good-looking, and he's charismatic, and he can really pull it off. And you can't tell what's happening with the cops and the lawyers, whether they're just letting him play his routine to get some information from him, or whether he's actually setting them back on his heels. And I suspect it's a bit of both. But it's masterful performance. If you didn't know who he was, and you were watching it without the audio, you'd think he's the CEO of some company giving his employees hell for not being up to scratch. That's all his body language, his eye contact, everything just speaks that. It's amazing. So anyways, you got these 2-bit hoods here who think they're really something. They also think they're tough and dangerous, and they're not. They're just, cowardly and corner dwellers, and they confuse their unwillingness to abide by reasonable rules as indication of their heroic courage, which is something else that low-rent hoods like to do, And it's partly because lots of people who just attend to the law do that because they're cowardly, which is a Nietzschean observation. Are you good, or are you just afraid? Well, let's start with afraid first. before we proceed to good. And that the reason that you follow the rules is because you're afraid of getting caught. Yeah, well, you know those kids who, often university kids who are in like a hockey riot and they end up breaking windows and stealing things, and you know they get nailed for it, and afterwards they're really blown away by their own behavior. It's like, well, they're in that camp. It's like they think they're good people, but they're not. They're just never anywhere where you could be bad. And as soon as you put them somewhere where they could be bad, it's like out it comes, just like that. And that's really worth thinking about, because most of you, many of you, but not all of you, I suspect, have never really been somewhere that you could be really bad and get away with it. And so you might think, well, you wouldn't do it, but people do it. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember, is don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits, you build those things in there, man, they're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. So, and then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. Something's behind the scenes pulling the strings. And everybody always wonders what that is, right? What's actually going on? What's actually going on with Trump? Who's actually in control? Is it Putin? I mean, that's the fantasies of the left. It's Putin. It's like, well, the question always is, what's going on behind the scene, right? And the question is, that's the case certainly on the political landscape, business landscape, interpersonal relations. What are you really up to? Everyone's always wondering that, right? That's why they're watching your eyes, because your eyes point at things, and they can infer what you're interested in and what you're up to by looking at what you look at. And that's why your eyes have whites, is so that we can see where you're pointing them, because gorillas don't. And so what that means, roughly speaking, is that all of your ancestors whose eyes couldn't be reliably tracked were either killed or didn't mate. It's a big deal for us to see where people's eyes are pointed. And so we're always watching each other's eyes constantly. What are you up to? What are you up to? What are you looking at? What do you want? And I want to know, because if I know what you want, I can predict how you're going to behave. And that also means I can cooperate with you, or I can compete with you, or I can lie to you. But all the information is in the eyes, surrounded by the facial display, right? Because that's also an indication of motivation and emotion. And so our eyes are so good at that for you guys sitting there in the back, I can tell if you're looking at my eyes or at my chin. And the deviation in your eyes is so tiny that it's a kind of miracle that we're capable of making that perceptual observation. It's really important to us. One of the things that was really big, and it's probably even worse now, when I was a parent of young children, was to teach your kids how to be afraid of strangers. It's like, no, wrong. That is not what you teach them. Because all you do is teach them then to be timid and fearful, and the real predatory types, they're pretty much thrilled about that, because you'll also make them sheltered and naive. You know, so that isn't, you make your kids courageous and you get their damn eyes open, and that's the best thing you can do to protect them against people who are truly dangerous. So none of that terrifying them. It's